Cinderella. Once upon a time, there lived a fair young girl with her father and mother in a beautiful home in the city. She was as happy as she was good, and she had all that her heart could wish. But by and by, a sad day came, and then many sad days. Her mother fell ill and died. Then, sometime after, her father married again. But the stepmother was cross and unkind. And to make matters worse, she had two daughters of her own who were as cross and unkind as she. They were so lazy and selfish that they made the poor young girl do all the work about the house. She swept the floors and scrubbed the stairs and made the beds and cooked the dinner and washed the dishes. And when all the housework was finished, she had to wait on her two proud stepsisters, make their fine dresses, and brush their hair when they went to bed. They slept in fine rooms where there were big, soft beds and long mirrors in which they could see themselves from head to foot. But she was sent to lie on an old pile of straw in the attic, where there was only one broken chair. And when her day's work was done, they made her sit in the chimney corner among the ashes and cinders and called her Cinderella, the Cinder Maid. But even dirtied with dust and cinders, she was far more beautiful than they. It happened at this time that the prince, whose father was king of that country, was nearly 21 years old. To celebrate his birthday, a splendid ball was to be given at the royal palace. Invitations were sent out far and wide. Cinderella's stepsisters went wild with delight when they received an invitation. They were proud and happy, imagining what they would wear. For days and days they talked of nothing but clothes. "I am going to wear my blue velvet dress and trim it with fine lace," said the elder stepsister. "And I am going to wear my pink satin with diamonds and pearls," said the younger stepsister. But the ball only meant more work for Cinderella. She had to wash her stepsisters' dresses, iron their laces, press their ribbons, and put their ruffles in order. And when they fought over who would look more beautiful, it was Cinderella who made peace between them. In the evening, while she brushed and braided their hair, the elder stepsister said, "Cinderella, don't you wish you were going to the ball tonight?" "Oh, you were only teasing me," she replied. "It is not for me to go to so fine a place as that." "You are quite right," snapped the younger stepsister. "Who would ask a dusty little ash sweeper to go to a royal ball? You're only fit to dance with your broom." Cinderella said nothing and only kept arranging her braids and curls. At last, the stepsisters were ready, and the carriage came clattering to the door. They climbed in and were whisked away to the ball. Cinderella watched the carriage until it disappeared from sight. Then she sat down by the kitchen fire and cried. As Cinderella wept and sobbed, she heard a kind voice say, "Dry your tears, my dear, and tell me what the matter is." Cinderella looked up to see her godmother, who was a fairy standing before her. "I wish I could, I wish," sobbed Cinderella. "I know," said her godmother kindly. "You want to go to the ball, don't you?" "Yes," said Cinderella. "Well now," said the fairy godmother, "let us see what we can do. Come now, run into the garden and fetch me a pumpkin." Cinderella wondered how a pumpkin could help her go to the ball. But she ran outside and soon returned with the finest pumpkin she could find. Her godmother scooped out the inside and tossed it with her wand. Suddenly, the pumpkin grew into a fine golden coach lined with red satin, while its curling vines looped themselves into 4 delicate wheels. Then her godmother noticed 3 fat mice in the mousetrap. "Lift the trap door," she said. Cinderella did, and as the mice scurried out, her godmother touched them with her wand and turned them to two prancing horses. The third and biggest mouse she turned into a fat, jolly coachman with a fine set of long whiskers. "Now, dear," she said, "go into the garden and bring me the two green lizards behind the watering can." Cinderella carried the lizards back to her godmother, who touched each one with her wand and turned them into footmen, their green uniforms sparkling with silver and gold. They leapt up behind the carriage and stood waiting there as they had been footmen all of their lives. Then her godmother said, "Here is a carriage fit to take you to the ball. Are you pleased with it?" "Oh, yes," cried Cinderella, and she was about to leap into the coach when she thought of the rags she was wearing. "Oh, but dear godmother," she said, "what shall I do about my clothes?" Her godmother laughed and touched Cinderella with her wand. The girl's rags became a rich dress of gold, silver, spangled with jewels every color of the rainbow. Then Cinderella asked, "And godmother, how shall I dance?" She pointed to her bare toes, which peeped from beneath her beautiful dress. "Goodness me, I quite forgot the shoes," said her godmother, and then she took it out of her pocket the most delicate pair of glass slippers, which fit Cinderella perfectly. "Oh, godmother, how can I ever thank you?" cried Cinderella. "Never mind about thanking me," said her godmother. "Only remember to do exactly as I say. You must leave the ball before 12 o'clock. If you stay a moment after midnight, the coach will return back into a pumpkin, the horses and coachmen will become mice, the footmen will turn to lizards, your beautiful dress will vanish, and only your rags will be left behind." "I promise, godmother, I will return before midnight," said Cinderella as she stepped into the golden coach. The coachman cracked his whip. The footmen stood up behind, and the fine horses galloped away like the wind. When Cinderella arrived at the palace, the prince himself ran to welcome her. He gave her his hand as she stepped out of the coach. When they entered the hall, the music stopped. The people fell silent, and all eyes turned to Cinderella. "How beautiful she is," they whispered to each other. The king himself whispered to the queen that he had never seen so fair a maiden. Then the music struck up again, and the prince led Cinderella out to dance. She danced so gracefully that everybody thought her even lovelier than before. All night long, the prince would dance with no one but Cinderella. She was so happy that she forgot to look at the clock, and before she had stayed even half as long as she wished, she heard the clock begin to strike 12. At once, Cinderella remembered her godmother's warning and rose up and ran from the room. But as she hurried down the steps, one of her glass slippers came off. As the clock ran out the last strokes, 9, 10, 11, 12, the coach became a pumpkin again, and the mice and the lizards scampered away into the shadows. As Cinderella hurried out through the great gate, her beautiful dress turned back into her old dirty rags. Moments later, the prince arrived. He asked the guards if they had seen a princess pass that way. The guards replied, "We saw only a poor girl in rags, Your Highness." Then the prince went back, shaking his head sadly, for he did not know the name of the beautiful stranger with whom he had danced all night. All he had was the shining glass slipper she had left behind. Cinderella ran through the night, finally returned home, tired and cold. Of her godmother's gifts, all she had left was one glass slipper. She took it off and tucked it carefully into her pocket. Then she sat down by the fire to wait for her stepsister's return. "Sitting on the ashes as usual," they cried when they came in. "Come, be quick and help us get ready for bed." As Cinderella hung up their dresses and brushed their hair, Her stepsisters chattered about the ball. There were so many beautiful ladies there, said the elder stepsister, but of course none as beautiful as we were, except perhaps a strange princess who danced all night with the prince. But she acted so strangely, broke in the younger stepsister. Did you see when the clock struck 12, she ran away without bidding anybody good night? Cinderella, snapped the elder stepsister. Are you listening at all? Off to bed with you. You look as if you were dreaming already. Cinderella climbed the stairs to her wretched bed in the attic. The next day, she was back at work, sweeping and scrubbing as hard as ever. Meanwhile, the prince could think of no one but the lovely strangers whose name he did not know. He sent men all through the land to invite every young lady to try on the little glass slipper. And he declared that he would marry the one whose foot the slipper fit. The glass slipper was placed on a purple velvet cushion and carried around to every house, so that each lady might try it on. When the messenger arrived at the house where Cinderella lived, the proud stepsisters were so excited their hands trembled. I shall try it on first, said the elder. No, my foot is smaller than yours, cried the younger, and they pushed each other very rudely. The elder stepsister snatched the slipper and began to try it on. She pushed and tugged till her face grew red, but not even her toes would fit in the delicate glass slipper. Then the younger stepsister took it. She managed to squeeze her toes in, but the heel would not go on. Silly thing, I don't believe it was meant to be worn, she cried. She kicked it off and burst into tears. As the messenger picked up the slipper, a quiet voice said, Please, may I try it on? Cinderella, screeched the elder stepsister, how dare you come in here? You try on the slipper indeed, cried the younger. No cinder maid's rough foot could fit in that delicate thing. But the messenger bowed to Cinderella and offered her the slipper upon the velvet cushion. It is the prince's command that every maiden in the land may try on the slipper, he said. So Cinderella sat down and he put the slipper on her foot. It fit perfectly. Then, from her pocket, she drew the other slipper and put it on her foot. At that moment, her fairy godmother appeared. She touched Cinderella with her wand, and Cinderella was no longer a cinder maid, but a beautiful young lady dressed in silk and satin. The stepsisters recognized her as the lovely princess whom they had seen at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet and asked her to forgive them for the unkind way they had treated her. She said that she forgave them and wished them always to love her. Soon after, the prince and Cinderella were married, and they lived happily together for many, many years. As for the stepsisters, Cinderella gave them rooms in the palace. They left off their cross, ugly ways, and by married 2 gentlemen of the court. For from their stepsister they had learned that far more important than a fine dress and a fancy hairdo are a kind heart and a generous spirit.